Antony, congratulations on everything you've achieved, and your public service has just been absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
What has made you decide now is the time to go?
Well, look, in my job, you end up having this 3-year cycle of federal elections. By the time of the next election, I'll be 68. And I know I'm not as sharp and quick as I was 5 years ago. In a couple more years' time, I think it just gets harder and harder. I mean, it's like a footballer. Sometimes they play on a season too long, and I'm making sure I don't do that. So I think this is the time to go. It was a decision I made 3 years ago. I confirmed it with the bosses last year and decided, well, this will be my last on camera. What I will do is I will stay on for another year or two. I've got some long service leave saved up, but I'll try and ensure that the work I've put into, I mean, people see me on camera, but most of my work is off camera, doing websites, doing background material, setting up computer systems. I'll pass on the website to somebody else. I'll keep working on the computer system for a few more years.
I remember when we came off air after the last federal election in 2022, you were absolutely exhausted and said at the time, I think that's my last one. It never shows on air, but I'm not sure if people realise how truly exhausting that job is and the amount of pressure that comes with it.
Well, that election was the hardest. I mean, when I started this job 35 years ago, every seat was a two-candidate preferred contest. 80 to 85% of the votes were cast on the day. You just got polling place results. Everything worked well in terms of predicting models. But things have got more complex. The major party vote has declined over the years. More and more people are voting pre-poll, which means they come in later in the evening and they don't always behave like the polling day votes. So the whole modelling process has got more difficult. As the major party votes dropped off, you're starting to see third parties come through from second to win with, say, the Teals at the last election. At that election, we didn't have an obvious model to call some of those seats. So you're having to make a lot more individual decisions where, when we first wrote the first version of the computer system we use now, back in the early 90s, there might be one or two seats you had to override or do something different with. But nowadays, it's like you're watching closely 15 or 20 seats. We use a computer system to call seats. On election night, we get a strip of data from the Electoral Commission every 2 minutes. We have a primary count, we have an estimated preference count. We get an actual preference count later for a different set of polling places, and then this all comes in. So we've got multiple different models going, regular results every 2 minutes. You have to use a computer system to call.
How did you come to work at the ABC?
Well, it's quite bizarre. I mean, I'd worked in the computer industry and got a bit dull. I thought I couldn't imagine still being doing that in 10 years' time, let alone 30 or 40 years' time. I went back to university in 1984 and I'd done a science maths degree at the first time through university after school. I did an economics politics degree in the mid-'80s. I think I'd been inspired by that first year of the Hawke government and all the change that was coming through. And suddenly it was all economics, and I was quite fascinated by the whole process. And I went back to university. I was doing an economics degree with a major in politics. And at the end of that, I was back writing computer code again. I'm thinking, my God, what have I spent 4 years doing this degree for? I was doing a postgraduate degree in econometrics at the time. I was looking around for something in that area because I didn't think there was much of a job in elections. And I told my bosses at work, I said, I'm leaving, I'm going to find something else to do. And I looked in the newspaper that weekend, there was this ad for an election researcher. You had to have media skills, research skills, knowledge of computers. And I went, that's me. And so I applied, and the legendary ABC producer, executive producer Ian Carroll, selected me of about 150 applicants. And I think I did have all the skills, I had the politics and that. But the one thing nobody else had, I had confidence as well, but nobody else had the computer skills that I had. This is way back in 1989.
So you've come in and they've realised, as you say, this guy's got kind of a unique skill set that no one else has got. When did that shift from that you were going to be a behind-the-scenes guy to an on-air guy?
It was about 2 years later. I mean, what was interesting was that first election. I mean, in the first 3 or 4 months I was here, this is the end of 1989, you had the Berlin Wall fall. You had Nelson Mandela released. You had the coup in Romania. And I'm sort of in a media organisation seeing this footage come in. It used to come in a half-hour package every day, not by satellite once upon a time in those days. But to see that and I think, wow, I'm hooked. This is good and interesting to do. What happened was the 1990 federal election went till very late in the evening. And Paul Lynham and Kerry O'Brien and Andrew Orley all told the head of news they should re-employ me. And so I was given this job of redesigning a computer system to replace the rather ancient system the ABC had. And about a year and a half later, we used it for the first time in Queensland in 1992. And the new computer with me was just terrific. It worked really well.
And with the computer age well and truly upon us, another vital member of our team tonight is the ABC's resident psephologist, Antony Green, an expert in analysing voting trends. Antony has the very latest in computer technology at his fingertips, so we'll be able to constantly update our projections.
In the meantime, I'd done some work on writing software to calculate redistributions, and in 1991 there was a major one in New South Wales. The Greiner government cut the size of the parliament by 10 seats, and it had all sorts of political implications. And over the weekend, I worked out all the implications, and it wasn't what the parties were saying with the implications. And I had an article in the Herald saying that, and everyone was a bit amazed about how accurate it was. But Quentin Dempster put me on camera that night to talk about these new boundaries. I remember I was so nervous. We had this office divider with a map, and I had to use a pointer, and my hand was going like that. And Janie Laylaw, the late Janie Laylaw, came down and said, if you lean the pointer on the map, your hand won't shake. So this is my first tip. And I remember bumping into Paul Williams, who you would know as a legendary ABC producer. I bumped into him on the Monday, and he said, mate, I saw you on camera on the weekend. I said, oh, I was so nervous. He said, yeah, we could see you were nervous, but everyone could tell you knew what you were talking about. And so I think that was the advantage I had when I went on camera. People were, I was slightly quirky, had a funny accent in those, stronger in those days. And everyone went, well, he knows what he's talking about, though. Yeah. And so that's where it started. And then they used me on camera for the first time. The 1993 federal election was my first on camera. We had a new computer system. We didn't display the graphics quite right, but it predicted quite early that the Keating government was re-elected, and there was a bit of a bun fight about whether we could call that.
Well, that's because it was very unexpected, that because everyone anticipated Keating was going to lose. So it was quite something when you were on live TV going, oh, Keating's going to be re-elected, because people didn't believe it.
And Antony, you've been looking at that, Antony Green?
I've actually got two things to say. First, before I go into the National Party, at this stage, Labor is truly hanging on to office. Unless a lot of seats fall in West Australia, we could be seeing Labor return.
That night, the managing director was David Hill, and on the board at the time were John Bannon, the former South Australian Premier, and Rod Cameron, who was a former Labor Party pollster. And they thought Keating had lost. And they were watching our coverage, and it was showing, oh, it's a swing to Labor, swing to Labor, swing to Labor. And there was a lot of concern from high up in the organisation. Are we getting this right? Stop using those predictions. It was
But I mean, so this is your first time on air. I mean, it must have been kind of terrifying.
Well, I mean, one of the things about people don't always understand about television is that there's always layers above you that look after this. There's an executive producer and a head of news in between you and management.
Sure, but you're the one live on TV saying Paul Keating's going to be, re-elected. It's a big call that you have to make.
Well, I always remember, because I mean, one of the difficulties was I could see the numbers, I could see what was going on. I remember Andrew Olley, who was surrounded by Andrew Peacock on one side, and they're all saying it's too close, too close. And I was on camera at a certain point and said, the Keating government has been re-elected, and I drew the chamber, and it was a Labor majority of 9. Cut back to Andrew Olley, who was surprised by this and just went, well, of course, it's early figures,
You mentioned when you first started doing it, you were just horrendously nervous. What about now? Do you still get nervous?
Usually before. I get nervous until I see the first figures come in from the Electoral Commission.
And then it's kind of off and running, right?
You're off and running. Once you've got numbers, you know you've got numbers. I mean, in those early days, we used to get breaks in the data. I think I described election night as being like bungee jumping for intellectuals. You've got this thin tether of data which keeps you in touch with the Electoral Commission.
What did your mum and dad think about seeing you on TV when you started out?
I think they were quite chuffed. I mean, it was, they'd done all right. Mum and dad was an electrician from the north of England. Mum was a seamstress, and they migrated here. I got a good education here. I've done all right in this country. Done better than I would have done in Warrington, in Lancashire, where they come from. Look, they were very proud, and Dad died 14 years ago, a heart attack, and Mum died of dementia a couple of years later. I got an OA a couple of years back after they died, and I think one of the reasons I was happy to take the OA, because they would have been so proud of that.
What were you like as a kid?
I was always bright, always good in numbers.
Confident?
No, not particularly. I was not always I was a bit... I think I was always a spark when I was a young kid. I was a voracious reader. I still am, still a notorious devourer of facts. Not always very good at putting them into good order and synthesising a general theory. So
I know you love cycling, you love cricket. Are you going to have more time to do those kind of things, or are you still going to keep working? What's your plan now?
I will continue to work. I'm not going to give up. There's some history projects at State Parliament. I did a project about 20 years ago which pulled together all the election results in New South Wales back to self-government in 1856, which had never been pulled together before because it's just not available as documents. You have to find it in the newspaper as in the microfilm. So there's some work on that in terms of indexing, which I would go back and do, which would be fun just to occupy my time. I will stay involved with the ABC computer setup, particularly. I'll continue with the website through to the next South Australian election, which is early next year. But after that, I'll sort of slowly step away.
Anthony, you have been an awesome colleague. I have greatly enjoyed working with you and admired you for 30 years. You've just been absolutely brilliant. And as I say, thank you so much for your service and just being such a trusted figure for the ABC. You're an absolute legend.
And it's fantastic to work with you and all those many people who've worked before, like Kerry O'Brien, who played such an important part in me being on camera and staying on camera. He didn't like the touch screen, but that's another story.
But many, many legends.
But I've worked with many, many people over the years. And to me, from someone who didn't have a journalism background, what has always made me feel special. I mean, I've had imposter syndrome sometimes. What am I doing here?
The thing that has always impressed me about you is that you have treated me exactly the same when I was anchoring the whole thing as you did when I was a 22-year-old junior reporter in the newsroom, and it's been very much appreciated.
It's like a star is born. You have to be nice on the way up because someday you'll be on the way back down.
Anthony, thanks so much.
Thank you.